Okay, now, to start off, I'm almost certain that a lot of my subscribers are tired of seeing this timeline whenever they click on one of my videos. But, I'd like to get some points across. Firstly, the purpose of this video is meant to solidify my reasoning on why the games of the Four Swords sub-series take place where they do. But I'm also going to point out one problem in my timeline that, strangely enough, nobody else has specifically mentioned until now. Firstly, let's start with the basics, being that Minish Cap is what I consider to be first. Now why is this? Well, if you look at what I proposed here, it does make some degree of sense because there isn't any mention of Ganon in Minish Cap, which is what is known to be a standalone game. Now that's not exactly proof enough, but I'll continue. Now, as we know, Minish Cap is part of the Four Swords sub-series. In actuality, the first game in said sub-series, with Four Swords Adventures being at the end. Now, I'm confident that the Four Swords Adventures takes place a little while before A Link to the Past. The reason I don't believe you can place the first two games close to the third is that it has to do with the geography. It's known that Mount Krenel, which is featured in Minish Cap, isn't the same as Death Mountain, which is a Hyrulean staple. Whereas the kingdom in A Link to the Past features not only Death Mountain, but also other trademarks such as Zora's River, Lake Hylia, and the Lost Woods. Where I'm going with this is that from Ocarina of Time, which is the most universally accepted earliest game in the timeline to feature these landmarks, to A Link to the Past, all of these landmarks are somewhere on the map, although it's evident that changes are being made. Firstly, as I mentioned before, the war that's talked about in Ocarina of Time that unified the kingdom, in quotes, is what I believe to be the combining of Hyrule with the Gerudo Desert, as a desert is not in Minish Cap's Hyrule, yet exists in Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess and A Link to the Past. Remember in the ending of Wind Waker, Ganondorf, who is obviously the one from Ocarina of Time, says that he desired Hyrule because winds of death were always plaguing his land, and he wanted his own land that was free of such pain. This was a paraphrase of something that's said at the end of Wind Waker from Ganondorf before the final fight. Now, why would he mention Hyrule as if it were another land, unless the Gerudo Deserts weren't originally part of Hyrule? All renditions of the Gerudo Desert are shown to be in the west to southwestern portions of Hyrule, from Ocarina of Time through A Link to the Past. And remember, Wii's version of Twilight Princess is a mirrored flip of the canon GameCube version, so this is also true there. Another constant between all these games is the presence of Hyrule Castle to be somewhere in the central to north central area of the kingdom. Now we have the movers, which shows that serious time is occurring between these games. Thousands of years, in fact, as certain pieces of the landscape are shifting as time passes. Now notice in the Minish Cap how the Minish Woods, that particular game's forest, is in the eastern to southeastern portion of the map. The next game in my theoretical timeline shows the Kakiri Forest featured in Ocarina of Time. Now, this is shown to be in the relatively same area as before in the Minish Cap, although slightly more to the south, so we know some time has passed. Now in Twilight Princess, the Faron Woods and Sacred Grove have both been moved farther to the west, and now seems to be turning a clockwise direction. If this were to continue for a few thousand years, we would end up with the Lost Woods that we have in A Link to the Past. Similarly, starting from Ocarina of Time, Lake Hylia is also making a clockwise direction across the landscape, featured in the south-central to southwestern area in Ocarina of Time. Then in Twilight Princess, it's featured far north of where it was previously. And in A Link to the Past, it's again slightly to the south, but this time it's also farther to the east. So that's a clockwise direction. Now, I could continue with this by saying that the pattern continues by similarities between Death Mountain and Zora's River, how they seem to flip-flop locations with every game I've mentioned so far, but that's less solid. But to be honest, Zora's River could possibly be constantly diverted every couple hundred years by the Hylian people to always make sure it drains into the shifting location of Lake Halaya, so that is feasible. Now, as I mentioned before, the pattern between these locations that I've mentioned show at least a certain pattern to the moving of the Kingdom of Hyrule. So if we were to look at this pattern based on the landmarks that are recognizable, Minish Cap would have to be first. I'm well aware of the Triumph Forks, pronunciation of the Triforce in Minish Cap, which is also the garbled pronunciation of it that's shown in the Wind Waker. But also consider that it's so early in the timeline that people of Hyrule might not have yet discovered the sacred relic. So, as we see, the Minish Cap is most likely the earliest game in the timeline that features a full-fledged world map. And Four Swords Adventures is relatively close to A Link to the Past, as I've mentioned. So, a gap between the games is necessary. Now we come to the problem in my timeline that I did mention before. The problem is, after this imaginary line that I've carved into the timeline, both of the timelines, left side and right side, Hyrule A and Hyrule B, have a unified Triforce, as when Ganondorf dies in Twilight Princess, whether it's a new Ganondorf or not in the Four Swords Adventures, the Trident becomes his source of power, as he no longer holds the Triforce of power. Similarly, in the Wind Waker, when the King of Hyrule makes his wish on the Triforce before Ganondorf can, all three shards of the Triforce leave together, implying one of two things. Number one, they simply float to above the Great Sea and, after a couple hundred years, choose their vessels of a new generation of Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf, which makes the last two games happen just fine. However, number two, they leave and reform into one, which means that the original two Zelda games cannot take place after Phantom Hourglass unless a future game resplits the Triforce. Because remember, it was split prior to Zelda 1, however, it also cannot take place anywhere on the left side, because the Triforce is unified once again after the Triforce of Power leaves Ganondorf in Twilight Princess as well. And since that's the same Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, the original 8-bit games couldn't take place between any time between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Besides that, I've mentioned in my other timelines the reasons for placing Zeldas 1 and 2 on the right side. You know, the lack of a Master Sword, the ravaged landscape, and the presence of the towns named after the sages. Too many signs, in my opinion, point to them being on the right side, just for me to simply ignore it. Now, is it Situation 1 or Situation 2? I'll let you theorize that one for yourselves if you're a supporter or detractor, it doesn't matter. Although Situation 1 solidifies my timeline more, you have to admit that Nintendo needs to make 2 more standalone Zelda games on the right side of my theoretical timeline to even it out, by number of standalone games. Not that it needs to be even, it's just a quirky fact. Anyway, this will be my very last video on the Zelda timeline unless I have any particularly major reason for any readjustments. However, I hope you guys will continue to respond with videos and make your own views known on this subject, though we don't know the whole picture yet because they're not done making Zelda games and they probably never will be. That doesn't stop us from having our own little theories that can debunk the myth of Zelda being the puzzle that can't be solved. In particular, I'm intrigued to what TrueEdge 2097 has to say, as he made several intelligent arguments and seems like a highly intelligent man overall. As well as AGentertainment, because Anthony's such a diehard Zelda fan as any of us, and his filmmaking ability is far above par, so I'd be interested in seeing his side of the equation. Alright guys, this is Lan, and keep your theories coming, oh scholars of Hyrule.